Welcome, everybody. My name is Debbie Goldich, and I am the International President of Women's League, and I want to welcome everyone to this series of How to Live Forever. And we thank Corey Schneider, past International President, for wonderful, wonderful programming on this subject. And we have a great speaker tonight to tell us what to do with all of those pictures and documents. I need to tell you that we are being recorded. And if you do not want to be recorded, please remove yourself from the video. Your name will be there. And if you choose not to have your name, you need to change your name. Okay, but we are recording. And as someone asked, it will be on the Women's League website, probably in about a week after it's been edited. Okay, so again, we want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Let me tell you that I have muted everyone, and you are not able to unmute yourself until later in the program when Corey and our speaker will take questions. I've also disabled the chat. You're not allowed to chat. Later, I will enable the chat and you will be able to ask your questions, and we will have time for that in the program. So welcome everybody again, and I want to welcome and introduce Corey Schneider, past International President. Corey?
Thank you, Debbie. Not only am I a past international president, but for this presentation, even more important, I've been given the honor of being the Archives Chair for Women's League. As Archives Chair, my goal was not only to tell Women's League's story, but also to help you tell yours. I'd like to give a special welcome to Ellen Bresnick and Julia Loeb, who are co-chairs of education. We are partnering with this series. Many, many thanks to Sheila Kaufman, who is on, and she is our tech support and will help us with all of those things. If you are like me, you have a basement overflowing, or an attic, or a special room, or your garage even, overflowing with boxes of family photos and old letters, children's artwork, report cards perhaps, and other assorted papers and documents. And you have spent years avoiding those boxes because you don't know how to start organizing them. Or if you started, you're not quite sure how to continue. Tonight's very special presenter is Robbie Terman. Robbie is the director of the Leonard and Simons Jewish Community Archives at the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. And we can spotlight Robbie while I'm talking about her. With a master's degree in library and information science and archival administration, plus more than 12 years experience, Robbie is on a mission to ensure the past is not forgotten. She has contributed to the Jewish Women's Archive, Detroit Jewish News, and the Society of American Archivists Outlook. Robbie believes that every day is a chance to make history and strives to help others contribute their own stories for the enrichment of future generations. She will share tips and tricks to help make organizing your family's historic documents and photographs a snap, pun intended. She will also present information on preserving this precious memorabilia, what type of supplies to use and why, and where to store your finished products to increase their longevity. Robbie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm excited to talk with you about archives, and I love this idea of this series because obviously I'm very passionate about making sure that our history is saved and that it is not forgotten. So if you'll bear with me for 1 second, I'm going to just share my screen and turn on the PowerPoint. Okay. So as we all know, that dealing with our personal and family archives can be very overwhelming. As Corey said, there is not a single one of us who doesn't have either a closet or a drawer, or a basement full of materials that maybe we just even pretend don't exist because we just don't have the time to deal with it or just don't know how to deal with it. So as she said, my job tonight is to give you those tips and tricks and tools that you need to confidently deal with all the materials you're holding on to ensure that they're around for future generations. There's no doubt many treasures and likely some trash in those boxes, and we want to make sure they last as long as possible. So when it comes to pretty much any medium, whether it's paper, analog, digital, there's no way to stop deterioration completely, but what you want to do is slow it down as much as possible. So that makes how we handle it and how we store these materials very crucial to their longevity. So the bulk of my talk today is going to be on paper-based items. So that's going to be things like documents and photographs. And in the end, I will also briefly talk about digitization, but I think it's very important to remember that your organization of these materials really needs to come first and then consider digitizing. But before we even talk about the collections and how to organize them, I think it's really important to start with the answer to one question, which is, what do I keep? Oops, sorry, went one too far. There we go. What do I keep? So the truth is you can't, nor should you keep everything. Remember that someone is going to inherit these collections. So if you get very sentimental or you struggle to weed what you have, the more likely it is that your descendants might get frustrated and end up just tossing everything out. And they'll throw out the treasures with the trash. So it's better to go through these items now and find out what's important to your family history and your story. Now, from an archival perspective, I can tell you that 95% of what comes into an archive is actually trash, and only about 5% is treasure. And it's up to the archivist, or in this case, it's up to you to find that 5%. When it comes to archives, there are 4 qualities that determine if something should be kept. But for the purposes of this class tonight, I really only want to focus on one thing, and that is enduring value. Meaning, does the record have cultural or informational importance which tells us about the past in a manner that a researcher or a family member would find useful and interesting? Now, useful and interesting are 2 very subjective words, so this is going to be your judgment call. But think about the type of documents that tell something about ourselves, about our families, about our lives, and what we value. This could be things like a diary, letters, genealogy documents, maybe a treasured family heirloom, family recipes. Now, do you really need to keep that thank you note when you made a contribution to Save the Whales? You probably don't. Or how about if you're a person who has kept every brochure from every museum you've ever visited, you probably don't need to keep that either. Remember that storing materials takes time and money, so you want to use your judgment. Think about your own ancestors. What would it be so meaningful for you to have of your great-grandparents? That's the sort of materials you want to think about leaving for your descendants. I do want to clarify one thing, that when we are talking about archival records today, I'm talking about inactive files that you don't use on a regular basis. You shouldn't use this method for things like your financials or anything your accountant is telling you to keep. That's records management. That's something different. So I don't want anyone to get in trouble with the IRS. So in order to really make your supplies last as long as possible, you need the right materials. So I'm going to go through a list of some of the archival supplies that I suggest having. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that archival supplies can be expensive, but we're also talking about the most important documents and family mementos to us. So it might be worth putting some money invested into this process. Now, if there is only one thing that you can afford to buy for this process, my suggestion would be acid-free boxes and acid-free folders. These 2 supplies alone will go very far in preservation. Why? because paper has a high acidic content and it's extremely susceptible to moisture and temperature fluctuations, which causes materials to expand and contract, and it contributes to deterioration. Acid-free archival folders and boxes stabilize and protect photographs and documents over a long period of time. And it also provides protection from things like light, pests, pollutants, and water. Now you're going to be getting a handout after this class, and it's going to include some of the suppliers that I recommend for buying archival supplies. These are companies that all they do is archival supplies, and they're the ones that archives use to get their supplies from. But as I mentioned, this can be pricey. So if you decide to go to one of your local big box stores, you need to be cautious about one thing, and that's the term archives has become really ubiquitous. So companies will slap the word archival onto a product, but it really doesn't mean anything. So you want to make sure you're buying products that are safe for your prized possessions. So when you're talking about things like boxes and folders or paper-based storage items, you want to look for words like acid-free or lignin-free, and lignin is a naturally occurring acid. If it lists a pH on the description, the pH should be 7 or above. pH is a scale of how acidic something is. It goes from 0 to 15, so 7 and above is good. You shouldn't buy any boxes and supplies until you've surveyed your collection, because you want to get the right size box and folders for your materials. And they come in all different sizes. They come in letter size, legal size, specialty sizes, oversized boxes and folders. So you really want to make sure you are getting the right supplies. So survey it first, take some measurements, have an idea before you spend money on boxes or folders or really anything. Now, if you're dealing with a lot of photographs, you might want to consider getting some photo and document sleeves, especially for things that are fragile or maybe have a little bit of damage, tearing, that sort of thing. So you put things like that in things that are fragile into a sleeve because it helps protect it then you won't be handling it so much. So in this handout that you're going to be getting, it's going to tell you the names of the type of material. I'm going to say it now, but you are not going to want to write this down. You can wait for the handout. So the material for the sleeve should be made out of polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene. Don't use plastic or PVC, which emits acid and leads to deterioration. Now, if you're looking at sleeves at one of the big box stores and trying to decide if it's a safe material, what you want to look for are words like PVC free, or maybe inert or stable. You don't need to look for acid free. That's a term used for paper. So that you won't see in a sleeve, in a description for the sleeves. Again, don't buy anything until you've done a survey. You want these items to fit you want sleeves that fit the photo or documents snugly in the right size. So you want to make sure you know what size you need to buy before you make the purchase. Now, because you can only fit 1 to 2 photos or documents in each sleeve, at the most, you should do 2 back to back. The reason for this is because the point of these sleeves is to handle items less. So if you stuff a bunch of documents or photos into one sleeve, that means when you want to look at something, you actually have to take them all out. Then you're handling it too much. So no more than 2 in a sleeve back to back. So that's not always cost effective. They also make photo document envelopes. They're paper envelopes, and those hold up to about 20 to 25 photographs in each one. And again, it comes in a bunch of different sizes. I know that some people, I'm talking a lot about putting your items in boxes because that's what we do in archives. But I know some people like to have their materials in photo albums, especially if they like to open them, look at them a lot, show them off. It might be a better idea to have them in photo albums. Now, again, you want to make sure, because photo albums are paper-based, you want to make sure it's an acid-free album. No plastic, no PVC. You don't want that plastic cover sheet over the photos. You should use photo corners. Do not glue or tape. Do not, under any circumstance, use those sticky back albums that the photo just sticks right on them. Those cause a lot of deteriorations. In fact, if you have your photos in those, that's probably a priority to get those out of there. And they can be hard in those sticky back albums. Over time, the photos basically adhere to the backing. It can be very difficult to get them off. So this is what I say if you are dealing with a sticky back photo album and you cannot get the photos off of it. First thing to try to do is take some dental floss, and you just kind of gently under one corner, using the dental floss, kind of shimmy it back and forth. See if you can loosen it under the photo to pull it off. If you cannot get it off, if you are causing damage, then stop and just leave it in. Better you leave it in and potentially digitize, which we will talk about later, than cause any permanent damage. But I do suggest, if you can, getting photos out of those sticky back albums. Now, you might be sitting on a lot of negative and slide storage. So they make storage for these items too. And there's actually different ways you can do it. So you can do whatever you are more comfortable with and what costs are best, work with your budget. So let's take slides, for example. They make slide boxes like you see on the left, where you can put a bunch of slides in, or they make them in sheets. Again, these are like polyester sleeves that fit slides, and you can put those into archival binders. Now, it's the same thing with negatives. They make polyester sleeves. They also make paper storage for negatives. So you can actually buy, it fits negatives, like 35 millimeter negatives, and then they have them for the different size, the 4x6, 4x5, 3x5, 3x3 negatives. There's a storage for every size, depending on what you have. And again, I'm going to keep saying this. Know what you have before you place this expensive order. Some other tools you'll need are pencils and Sharpies, or at least an archival felt tip pen. In archives, we only use pencils. We do not use pens, not ever. And that's because we don't make permanent marks on anything. So anything that's going to cause a permanent mark, we don't use. The only exception is that fine point Sharpie, or you can also use things like a micron pen, because glossy backed photos, which you want to put identifying information on, they don't, pencils don't work on glossy backed photos. So that's why you need something like an extra fine point Sharpie. There are certain supplies you want to avoid at all costs. So that's going to be things like glue and adhesives. Things, remember those self-stick photo albums, those, stay away from those. You want to avoid anything metal, like paper clips and staples, because metal rusts over time and it's going to stain your documents. They do make it's like a plastic paper clip, but this is a safe, archivally safe paper clip that you can get through. You can get it through archival supply companies, or you might be able to find it in a big box store. You also don't want to use rubber bands, because again, over time they deteriorate and basically adhere to the documents. As I said before, you don't want to use pens, not ever. You don't want to do anything that's going to leave a permanent mark. So before you get started working on your archives, you need to prepare yourself and your workspace. So you want to have a clean and clear space to work at. You'll want to be able to spread out. I suggest doing it in a space maybe that you don't have other papers on, because you don't want to accidentally intermingle a bill you have to pay into a box that's going to sit on the shelf for the next 20 years. Depending on how much you have, it will probably take more than one sitting to do this. So it's nice to find a safe space where you can kind of leave things out while you work for an extended period, if you have that kind of space. Just make sure you don't eat or drink or smoke around your documents. You do not want to stain any of the papers, and you don't want to make it enticing to any vermin because you dropped some food crumbs on it. Wash your hands before you work with archives, and don't apply lotion because it can stain the paper. Your documents and photos can be handled without gloves. Be careful, you want to handle it carefully. But clean, lotion-free hands are actually the best thing you can do, because when you wear gloves, you really lose tactile sensation. So you are far more likely to tear a piece of paper if you wear gloves than if you don't wear gloves. So. And also you want to stay away from nail polish while you're working on this, because actually nail polish can stain documents. Like if you're wearing like a bright red nail polish or something and you rub your hands against paper, you actually can leave stains. So maybe just clear nail polish while you're working on your archives. Okay, so I know a lot of you are really here for the organizational methods. How do you take the boxes and the folders and the drawers and your garage, and how do you make sense of it? Where do you go? What do you do? So the first thing you need to know about organizational methods is that no two methods are the same, because the materials dictate how the collection should be organized. And since no two collections are the same, no organizational method is going to work on every single collection. So it all depends on what materials you are personally holding on to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just offer some advice and tips tonight on the type of materials that I think that you are most likely to have in your personal collections. So as I've mentioned before, I keep using the word survey. You want to do a survey of your collection before you start. It's not just for finding out what size materials you have, but it's also to figure out what you have. Is it primarily documents? Is it primarily photographs? Is it a mix of both? Is it mostly family genealogy documents? Is it mostly your personal records with your career, family, philanthropy life? This is going to help you decide what's going to work best for organizing. So kind of look through what you have, make some notes, kind of put some categories down, like, okay, I have a lot of vacation photos, or I've written a lot of articles for different publications. I have a lot of my writings. Kind of just get a sense of what you have. So I suggest kind of putting like items with like items. So I would do documents with documents, and then photographs with photographs. AV is a separate thing. AV goes with AV. That's your tapes, cassettes, film, things like that, audiovisual materials. One reason that we do them separately in archives is that different types of materials are traditionally stored at different temperatures. The truth is, in our homes, everything's going to be stored at the same temperature. However, different mediums do emit different levels of acidity. So it really is better, even if you're going to be storing everything at the same temperature, it really is better to do the different mediums separately. So I'm going to talk a little bit about documents and photographs separately, although all these methods will work on either one. But I want to start with document type, and this one is very specific to documents because, as I said, the organizational method is document type. So what kind of document is it? Is it something like maybe a letter, a speech? You have a lot of speeches. You speak at events a lot. Maybe you have a lot of genealogy documents. Maybe you're someone who has saved every invitation you've ever gotten. So you have a lot of materials like that. So, so you look at the different document types you have and group them together. This is where the spreading out starts. So you pile everything together. Maybe you put all your letters and correspondence in a pile. And then you put all your genealogy documents in a pile. And then you put all your invitations in another pile. This is also helps for feeling a little less overwhelmed because then you just deal with one pile at a time. Now with this, we're always working from our broadest category and then working our way down to smaller categories because we want to store these in a manageable amount in a folder. I have said before about not handling this too much. When you want to find something, if you've been saving invitations for the last 50 years and you try to stuff all those into one folder and then you want to find something, you're going to be handling a lot. It's going to take a lot to find it. But if you start making smaller and smaller categories, it's going to be easier to find something, and it also is going to be handled less. So if we're talking about document types, let's talk about that broad category, invitations. Okay, so we have invitations and we look at our invitation pile and we see, okay, well, I have a lot of birthday parties. I have a lot of anniversary parties. Maybe there's something else, graduation parties, whatever. Then you take that pile and you make new piles. So now you have a birthday party pile, and now you have a wedding pile, and now you have a graduation pile, or whatever your events are. So now you have smaller piles, more manageable piles. Maybe there's not a lot in each pile, and now is the perfect time to stick that small pile in a folder, label it invitations, birthday parties, and the date range, and always, always, always do the dates if you can do them. But maybe you say, okay, I've saved every birthday invitation for 50 years. I've got hundreds. So maybe you do one category smaller. Now you have invitations that you've reduced to birthday parties. Now you're reducing them maybe by year and saying birthday parties 1975, birthday parties 1976, or birthday parties 1970s. Birthday parties 1980s. You're getting each category down to a more manageable level to deal with. You'll see on here when I say speeches, I have 1995 and undated. Within each folder, I do recommend putting them in chronological order from oldest to newest, front to back, oldest to newest. If you have materials where you don't know the date, and that will happen a lot, I normally just put the materials in the back, the undated materials in the back, and I just note on the folder heading that there's undated material in here that I can't identify. So that's how you're dealing with document types. Now, what about, you might have a big mix and it's just going to be too hard to do it by document type, or maybe you want to use the same method for photos and your documents. Topics or subjects might be a good way to go. And we are going to always look at this the same way. We're taking our broad topics and then we're going to make them smaller. So we look at our collection and we think, okay, here in our boxes, I have stuff for my work life. I have stuff for my volunteering and philanthropy life. I have another pile of things having to do with vacations I've taken. Maybe I have another of family. We have each of those into piles, and then we're getting smaller. So let's take vacations. We go to Bermuda every year. I wish that was true. We go to Bermuda every year. So now we maybe take Bermuda 2009 and maybe have another one because we go so often at Bermuda 2010. And then I have another pile, Bermuda 2011, and so on. Each pile then gets its own folder. or maybe I go somewhere different every year. And so I'm starting my broad topic vacations, and then my piles are getting smaller to each locale. Same thing with something like, say, your volunteering work. You want to take your broad subjects, so your Women's League of Conservative Judaism, that's your broad topic. And then the different areas that you take part in from the organization. You can also notice that I have those big topics in alphabetical order. So normally that is what you would do. So you would do it alphabetically. That's how you would arrange your file folders in a box, arrange them alphabetically, then chronologically. So let's say you have their vacations Bermuda, and you have Bermuda 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. It would go in that order. So vacations Bermuda 2009, behind it would be 2010, behind that would be 2011. So alphabetical first, chronological second. Another way to look at organization is by family member. Where this works really well is if you are working on a largely genealogical collection. So you're the family genealogist and you have collected everyone's naturalization records and birth certificates and death certificates and marriage license. And you want to make it very easy for you to find these items. That's when you might want to do it by family member. So you'll see I'm using my Bob Jones as an example, last name, comma, first name, and then the type of record, and then I have the year. It's always helpful to include the years on anything that you have. I always put this as my public service announcement. Please start dating everything you have. I literally date my notes. When I'm taking notes, I date them. And then if you have different family members, maybe we have Jones Bob, maybe you also have his wife Jane. So next might be Jones Jane, whatever records you have, and you just keep going down. You'll notice I also have chronological. That is another way to do it. I usually recommend chronological if you only have one document type or mainly one document type. And this is most commonly seen in letters or correspondence. Say you have a big collection, your great-grandparents wrote to each other all the time. They were separated because of something, and they wrote to each other all the time, and you have all the letters. Well, that might be then the case where you want to just put it chronologically, which will make that the easiest way to arrange it. Oh, before I move on to a few more methods, I want to address one type of document that we probably all have in our collections, which are newspaper clippings. Newspapers have lignin in them, and that makes them extremely acidic. So we've all seen that brittle and discolored paper. I mean, within a few days of getting newspapers, they're already starting to get brittle. That's because of the lignin. So before you go to the trouble of organizing and preserving newspaper clippings, there's something you should really consider, and if it's even worth keeping. Newspapers are actually not considered primary source documents by archivists. By their nature, they're secondary sources, meaning that a reporter interviews people, takes the information, interprets the information, they write something up, someone else edits it, it's no longer a primary source document. However, if you do want to keep any newspaper clippings, and maybe something like an obituary might be something you might want to keep, I do suggest that you make a photocopy of it just on regular copy paper and discard the actual newspaper. Or if you really want to keep the original, you should either sleeve it or put it between two sheets of acid-free paper, because it will bleed on all the documents around it over time. This is the only instance when I will tell you to get rid of an original is newspaper clippings. Otherwise, we don't get rid of originals, but this is a case where I highly suggest you don't keep the original newspaper. Also keep in mind that many newspapers nowadays are available online through different sources. So you have to really ask yourself if it's worth keeping newspaper clippings. Okay, so some more organizational methods, and these are going to look familiar because I sort of talked about them, but now I'm looking at them in terms of photos. So topic, subject. Photos are something where you are probably going to have many categories, and I just want to illustrate again about taking your photographs, all the many boxes and piles of photographs you have, finding those big categories and progressively making them smaller. So I just took for an example, bat mitzvah. I've got tons and tons of photos for my bat mitzvah. So how might you make them into smaller, more manageable piles? Well, you might separate out maybe the party, or maybe and the service goes in another pile. Maybe if you had family come in and you did a little family reunion over that weekend, you have a third or fourth or fifth category, but your big category is the bat mitzvah, and then gets smaller. Same thing with something like maybe your college experience. For a 4-year experience, you're going to have a ton of photos probably. So you start with that big category. So here I put Michigan State University, and then you're getting it down. So here's all my photos from my dorm. Here's friends photos. Here's graduation photos. Now, some of these categories might need to even get smaller. So let's say friends, that's kind of a huge category, right? Unless you don't have a lot of friends. So you might say friends on spring break, friends group, friends at the bar, friends, whatever. And again, you're making the categories, making your piles smaller. So you might have sitting on your table, you could have 5 piles, you could have 10, you could have 20, until you get to a level that comfortably fits in a folder and that you feel that you could easily find things in without handling them a lot. Family groups are another great way if you're dealing with a lot of photos, family photos. So you might have a lot of family photos from a lot of different sides. So you might have your maternal and your paternal side, and then their maternal and paternal side on each side. So then we have the first 2 categories, then we have 4 more, and then 8 more. It can really grow huge. So what I suggest for that is starting with kind of the last name. So let's say my maternal side is the Jones family, my paternal side is the Singer family. Start with 1. So let's say I'm going to start with my Jones family and start again making piles. Do I have family portraits of a bunch of people, group photos? I might make a pile for group. I might make it for unknown people that no one ever identified, and I know their family, but I have no idea who they are. So I have a pile of that. And then I have photos for a specific family member, perhaps. So I have my Bob Jones photos, and I have his childhood photos. Then I have his marriage photos. Then I have his life photos. Maybe on my other side, I have their childhood photos. I have photos with just them. I have photos where they're taking it with other family members. I have photos with their friends. It can go on and on with every person, but it really helps if you keep separating them into smaller pieces and only work with one piece at a time. So if I'm working on the Jones family, that's all I'm working on. I'm not looking at Singer family. I'm only working with Jones right now. And I might even go further and say, okay, I'm only working with this one family member now. You just want to make this manageable so it's not overwhelming. And actually in a few minutes, I will talk about the overwhelming feeling, because this is overwhelming. So I keep talking about foldering them, right? So, and we talked about those acid-free folders. So this is an example of some of the archival folders. You'll notice on here, this collection happens to be done by document type. So you're going to see the first thing is going to be the document type, and then it gets down a little bit smaller and then ends with the date. So I know the I know the document type, I know who it's referring to, what it's referring to, and when. The 3 important things you want to do on your folder heading. It basically is the same way. So if we went back to, here, let's go back to the previous screen. This is basically what you'd be writing on your label of your folder. Let's go back to that topic, bat mitzvah, party, and the date. Now you'll notice also, I forgot to mention this earlier, that in archives, we write the date in the European method, which is the day first, then the month, and then the year. You don't have to do it that way. If you want to write May 3rd, 1988, or whatever the date is, that's totally fine. This is just in archives how we write things. We do use the European method, or pretty much I think everywhere but the US uses this method. So this is an example. It's not only your organizational system, these are your folder headings. You'll notice also on the left side, there's a number on it. Now, and I also saw as I was putting this together, I must have accidentally slipped a folder down that there's a number missing, but it actually is there, folder number 8. What this stands for, 1 refers to box 1, and then the number after the colon is the file folder number. So this is box 1, folder 6, box 1, folder 7, box 1, folder 8 actually is in there, and then box 1, folder 9. You do want to number each box of folders in a box so you can find them and put them back a little bit more easily. Do not number as you go along. The numbering should be the second to last thing you do. And I'll tell you in a little bit what your very last thing is, but your numbering should be second to last, because I can tell you from experience, if you make a mistake and then you've already numbered, you will have to erase all the numbers and redo them, and it's not fun. When you go to the next box, it starts back at folder 1. So if this was box 2, it'd be then box 2, folder 1, box 2, folder 2, box 2, folder 3, and then box 3 will be box 3, folder 1, and so on and so forth. Labeling is really important, and not just on the folders. You also want to make sure your photographs are labeled on the back, because just because you know who's in the photo doesn't mean your great-grandkids are going to know who the people are, or where the event was taken or when it was. So on the back of a photo, lightly write on it any information you know, the names of the people in it, if it was for an event, or what the photo is of, if it's not obvious, and the date, or at least an approximate year or something to date it. If you can write in pencil, write it in pencil. If it's glossy backed and you can't, then that's when you want to use that extra fine point Sharpie or a micron pen. Don't use a pen or a ballpoint pen that goes indents right through the photo. It will indent onto the other side. I like these full tab folders because I can get the most information out of, but you can also get the usual kind of folders you might be used to with that half tab or 1/3 tab. That last step that I talked about, that's making a guide to the collection, or what we call in archives a finding aid. It's basically a list of the boxes and the folder headings so that you can easily find things. You can do this in a Word document. You can do this in an Excel spreadsheet, whatever you're comfortable with. But you should make a list somewhere that says box 1, folder 1, and what's in it. Box 2, box 1, folder 2, what's in it, and so on and so forth. So when you are looking for those bat mitzvah photos, you just look at your finding aid or your guide, and you can say, oh, that's in box 3, folder 2. You take it out, you know where it is, you have it right away. You have now organized it really well, so you're only handling the necessary photos. So how overwhelmed are we feeling now? I know it's very overwhelming to look at a big collection and wonder where to start. So this is how I like to talk about getting started. So think about your house. Think about that room in your house, not maybe the room where you have the boxes of photos and documents, but maybe that catch-all room or catch-all closet in your house. The one where you throw the old clothes you're not sure what to do with, and you have old books, and you have some knickknacks and some other things in there. And you always plan to clean that room, but you just kind of avoid it and just close the door and don't want to deal with it. So if you want to clean it, what do? Okay, so you walk in the room and you look around and you kind of, at least you through your eyes survey and say, okay, well, I've got clothes, I've got books, and I've got objects in here. You don't start with everything at once. You make a plan of attack and you start with one item. So let's say you decide you're going to start with books. You ignore everything else in the room. All you do is pull all the books out and look at them. Then maybe you make a pile out of those books, a pile for the books you want to donate and a pile of the books you want to keep. Once you have the donate pile, you put them away, that's done. You take a look at those books that you have decided you want to keep and you look at it and say, what do I have? Do I have a lot of nonfiction? Do I have a lot of fiction? How do I want to arrange this on my shelf so I can find something easy? Do I want to arrange it by the author's last name? Do I want to put all the science fiction together and then all the mystery together and all of the romance together? And you put those away. It's on the shelf. It's beautiful. You can find what you want. You're done with it. And you move on to the next item. And you start that process all over until the whole room is clean and organized. It's basically the same with archives. You don't have to do everything at once. You can do this a piece at a time. So after you decide, kind of go through and decide which organizational method is going to work best for you, only start with one category to begin with. So let's say you have decided that you are going to organize by topics. And you like to go on vacation, you have a lot of vacation. So you decide you're going to start with vacation photos. Go through your boxes, closets, storage, whatever, and only take out the vacation photos. Ignore everything else. Go through each one, take out vacation photos. Don't worry about anything else. Deal with the vacation photos, go through the process, find out how you make those categories smaller, make your piles, get them foldered, get them in the box. Do not number the box yet, but get them in a box. Put them away. You'll deal with the numbering and the finding aid later. But now this is at least organized, done, put away. Now you decide you are going to come back and do family photos. So you come back and you're like, okay, well, I want to start with my grandparents. Only pull your grandparents' photos, no one else. Not the cute photos you find of your kids or your grandkids, not right now. Only worry about your grandparents. And so on and so forth. So you're only dealing with small pieces at a time. It's a manageable amount. It's not going to be as overwhelming. So start small. And always remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes a lot of time. And just to give you a little idea of the time it takes to arrange archival collections, our metric in archives is that it can take up to 4 hours to arrange a storage box, which is basically a banker size box. So 4 hours for someone who's a professional to do one box. So don't be hard on yourself if it takes a while. This is not easy, and it's better that you take your time and do it right than get frustrated and just kind of give up and just throw everything in a box. So yeah, don't let yourself get too overwhelmed. I want to talk a little bit about conservation because you probably will come up with against a few conservation issues when you're going through this. If you do come across a photo that's maybe ripped or a document that has a little tear or something in it, Those are the kind of things you want to put in the sleeves that we talked about, those polyester, polypropylene, polyethylene sleeves. Don't tape it with Scotch tape. Don't staple it. Do not glue it. Those type of materials will self-destruct over time, and it will cause permanent damage to the document. If something is damaged, you could consult a conservator, but you really have to think about whether or not it's worth the money to have it conserved professionally. That can be very costly. One option is if something's in pieces, say you could scan all the pieces. If you're good at maybe doing some photo editing, you can actually kind of put the pieces back together on Photoshop and other photo editing. This does take some skills, but it would probably be cheaper to hire someone to edit that photo than it would be to conserve the actual document. So there are some types of archival quality tape you can use, but I just caution if you're very inexperienced with doing conservation work, be very careful. You don't want to do anything that's going to cause permanent damage. You don't want to do anything that cannot be reversed. So just kind of be very careful about how you care for something that might have some damage to it. Do not laminate anything. Lamination uses harsh chemicals and it heats to bind the papers together. It does not stop deterioration. It only causes it to deteriorate faster. So please do not laminate anything. You may come across papers that have some mold on them, especially if you have your stuff stored in a basement or a garage or attic where it was exposed to moisture and temperature fluctuations. If you find documents with mold spores on them, you cannot ignore it. Besides the fact that it is a health hazard to humans and to pets, mold can spread. So you don't want to put it in a box with documents that don't have mold on it because it can spread to it. And on your worksheet, I listed the Northeast Document Conservation Center. They have a lot of information on their website about how to deal with issues with mold. You want to make sure it's dormant. If it has some mold spores on it, you want to make sure it's dormant or do something with it to make sure it's not going to spread onto your other documents or photos. Where you store your archives is important to its longevity. Store boxes in a stable environment with stable temperature and humidity. The ideal environment is 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 40 to 50% relative humidity. The truth is, in most of our homes, that's not a possibility. But as long as it's stable, as long as you have air conditioning in the summer, heat in the winter, no big temperature fluctuations, that's going to be best for your collections. Otherwise, if you have a big fluctuation, that's when you can have issues of mold, or more likely issues of mold. Keep your boxes out of basements, garages, and attics where it is harder to control the temperatures and where there is an increased risk of things like pests, water, and mold. If you have no other choice but to put the items in a basement, just make sure they're at least 6 inches off the ground in case of a flood. And actually, I would say even probably higher. Like much of the country, we've had flooding in the past few weeks, and I can tell you, I have a relative who had 8 inches of water in her basement. So 6 inches, the stuff was ruined. So you actually want to kind of get it as high off the floor as possible. You don't want to put it too close to things that might leak, like a window or a pipe. So basically, on a main level with steady temperatures is really the best place you can store this type of materials. So before I take questions, I do want to just talk briefly about digitizing. As I mentioned before, it is important that you organize your collection before digitizing, and that's because it's going to be helpful for you to know your organizational method because you're going to mimic it for your digital files. So however you organized it, how your paper files, that's how you want to organize it on your digital files. Same thing. So if it's Vacations Bermuda 2009, your digital file folder should be Vacations Bermuda 2009. You always want to connect your documents or your digital files to your actual physical documents. So if you have to rescan or something, you know where to find things. Once you've scanned, you really don't want to throw the originals away, except for the newspapers, or you might, if you scan maybe a moldy item and you want to get rid of that moldy item, that's okay. Scans are copies, they're backups. They cannot replace the originals. Only use flatbed scanners. Archival documents should never be put through a feeder. There's too much of a risk of them getting stuck or clogged in it and tearing. Every file needs to have an original file name. So you want to choose, as I said, you want to choose names that match the physical collection. So let's say you're doing digitizing a lot of your vacation folders. You might want to just have like a name like VB 209 1, VB 2009 2, VB 2009 3. That's Vacations Bermuda 2009. And then each file, each photo that's in the folder. There are companies that will scan for you. Just be careful about how they deliver the final product to you. Don't let them give you a CD or a DVD. I'm seeing that way too much lately, and it makes me think these companies don't know what they are doing. DVDs and CDs are obsolete media. Most of us don't even have a CD or DVD player on our computers anymore. And I can tell you, if you go out and buy a computer today, you will not find one with a CD or a DVD drive in it. So a better choice would be a file transfer, a digital file transfer, or a flash drive, an external drive, but don't let them give you a deliverable on obsolete media. And I do want to give you a public service announcement on digitizing, because it's such a hot topic. Every day I get someone saying to me, why don't you just digitize everything? Because it costs a lot of time and money. That's why we don't do it. When you have paper collections and you store it properly, it has a lifespan of a couple hundred years. The digital lifespan, maybe a few years. It's basically next to nothing. Files get deleted, digital files get deleted, get corrupted, technology changes, and then you can no longer open that file. Every time new technology comes along, you have to migrate it to the new technology or you will not be able to open it. Then your children will have to do this. Then your grandchildren will have to do this. And then your great-grandchildren will have to do this. Just because you've digitized the collection doesn't mean you are done. You have now given yourself and your descendants a lifelong job duty to manage those digital collections, and it is so much harder than managing paper. If you do digitize, and there's nothing wrong with it, but don't throw away the originals and make sure you have backups. In archives, we keep 3 digital copies just in case something goes wrong. One of those can be a cloud service. That's totally fine, but just remember, clouds are nothing more than rented space on someone else's server. That means the company that you are paying could go out of business, or they could stop supporting that cloud and not tell you, or maybe they'll tell you and give you a week to get all your stuff off of it. Maybe it will just crash. And all those examples I just said are documented things that have actually happened. So make sure you have your files in more than one place. One can be the cloud, but make sure you have maybe an external drive or a flash drive, something where it's in more than one place. Give one to your kids so they have a copy in case yours gets corrupted. It's just a good idea. So here is my contact information, and it will also be on the worksheet. And if you have any questions you think about later, I'm going to take questions in a minute, but if you have a question you think about later tonight or tomorrow, you can certainly feel free to shoot me an email and I will do my best to help you. So that's my presentation, and I welcome your questions.
Robbie, thank you so much. I really appreciate the information. And while we're waiting for people, the chat room will now open for your questions. And while we're waiting for you to write them, I actually have 3 questions, and we'll see. I don't want to hog this, but it was fascinating to me. The one thing that I wanted to ask you to comment on, which really struck me, is to determine what to keep. You said that you ask yourself, if I were an if I had this from an ancestor, would it be meaningful to me? Could you just expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I like to think about it like, when I think it can be very hard when you're looking at your own materials to really think about what someone else would want in the future of yours, because, we're sentimentally attached to a lot of these items and we think they're super important, and they are super important to us, but it might not really tell anything about us or our lives. So I do try to think about, okay, I never knew my great-grandparents. What would I wish that I had of theirs? I wish that I had more pictures of them. I wish I had maybe a diary or a writing of theirs so that I know what their voice, their writing, their thoughts sounded like. Do I really care maybe what, they belong to an organization and they made it, every year they made a donation and you have the letters that they donated. I really don't care about that. I want to know who they were as a person, maybe just, I guess I just think about what I wish I had of my own ancestors. And then I think that helps me kind of guide what I want to leave.
Thank you. 2 other hopefully quick questions before we get to the group. When you have crossover, when you have photos that fit in multiple categories, how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's when you just have to make a judgment call. So that's when you're trying to get them into smaller categories. So if you can fit into 2 categories or 3 categories, then maybe those categories aren't the right ones. So maybe you have to look for different categories. Or you might just have a judgment call.
Thank you. And one more quick question. So much today is being generated electronically. I mean, I have speeches that I've given and other things that I've never printed. It continues to be electronic. Are you suggesting that we perhaps print some of those files, those Word files, those other files?
No, you don't have to do that, certainly. So that's called Born Digital. That means it was born digital. There's no paper original. And that's, of course, a very, very big thing in archives. Most people now are producing born digital, not paper documents. There is going to be a lot of management. It goes back to what I said about digitizing, but in the case of these born digital documents or born digital photos, like our photos for up today, right, our born digital photos from digital cameras. These are stuff that we probably will have to manage digitally forever. But you do it really in the same way that you would arrange them if you were doing a paper. The digital files mimic organizing a paper collection. So you look at your digital documents the exact same way. You have a bunch of writings. Let's say you have a bunch of writings that you have written for, maybe it's for a newsletter, maybe it's a speech, whatever it is. So you look at those digital files and then maybe you look through them and say, okay, well, I have all these writings, but I can categorize them or I can make them chronological. So then you create digitally. So and on your computer, create files those same ways. Look at the big category. The big category is writings, and you make a folder for writings. Then you make a digital file. Let's say you decide you're going to do it chronologically and you have 2015, and then you make another folder for 2016, and you start moving those digital documents into the correct folders. This is going to keep you organized. You'll find things easier. You can do the exact same finding aid, but it's just going to be for your digital files instead of your paper files. You want to back them up at least 2 places. I recommend 3, but you want to back that up to all the documents. You want to back that up to at least 2 places.
Thank you. Okay, Debbie, what do we have in our chat?
Okay, so Robbie, there are a lot of questions about slides. People have 10,000 slides, if you have any suggestions for that. And then the second big question is a lot about digital photos that are on your phone or on Facebook and what to do with those photos.
Yes, so I'm going to start with the slide. So I'm going to make myself some notes. So slide and Facebook photos. Okay, so slides. So if you have something like 10,000, you might want to have a company get those digitized for you. But I have to say with 10,000, I'm guessing there is a lot of trash in those. And what I mean by trash is back when we didn't know, when we couldn't look at our cameras and on our digital photos and say, oh, this is a good photo, and that's the end of it. You remember the time when we took 50 photos of the same thing because we have actually, you know, we didn't know the quality it was going to come out until it was printed. I'm guessing there is a lot of duplicates. I'm guessing there's a lot of pretty much the same photograph from different angles, maybe a lot of landscape photos that you have no idea at this point what they even are. I know I found some old 8mm film of my grandparents. They got a camera and they were so excited about it. They took it in the car, put it out the window holding it. And it's literally just, I have tape after tape of the world moving so fast, you can't even see what anything actually is. So that's not worth my money to get that digitized. And I'm guessing there's probably a lot of those slides that just are not worth the money to get digitized. Now, what that means, there's 2 things this can mean. One is that if it's too time consuming for you to go through this, which I totally understand, and you just want to, you know, see if you can get it digitized. And if there's ones that you end up, digital files you end up don't wanting, oh well. But another thing is to kind of go through it. And what you can do is buy a light box. They're not very expensive. Basically, it's kind of it's a stand where you can fit probably like 50 slides on, and it has a light behind it so you can see what's on the slides without having to actually digitize or look up at the light and try to see what's on it. This is how we organize slides in the archives. We use a light box and we take a look at everything. We eliminate what we don't want, and then we only deal with what we want to keep. You have to decide if it's worth your time to do that for so many slides. Facebook photos. So I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook photos because they're very low quality. The best thing you can do is the original photograph. So if you took the photo yourself, use that original photo, save that original photo, the original digital photo, not the Facebook version. So there's something in photos called compression. And basically it means you're losing quality every time the photo is compressed. And when you put photographs on Facebook, it's compressed. When you try to download them from Facebook, it's compressed. And what that means, it's a very low resolution photo. So you might be able to print it in the future, but it's going to be low quality. You can never use it for blowing up and making a big print out of, because the resolution and the pixelation is going to be pretty grainy. So keeping the original is always best. And if you are, you see about your grandkids they're posting photos on Facebook and you want to keep them, and you keep them for yourself if you want to download them and keep them for yourself. If you really want to do something with them though for preservation purposes, like to save for future generations, contact them and see if they can send you the original files instead of downloading from Facebook, because like I said, they're not going to be great quality over long-term preservation as they would if you have the original file. I would be hesitant. So I'm not even going to get into copyright issues, but certainly there's copyright issues regarding other people's photos. But if you can get your hands on the originals, it's always better to have the original.
Okay. So Robbie, there's a lot of questions about families. For example, how do siblings share a parent's wedding album? Or if you have more than one child, if you have 3 children, how do you archive for 3 children? There's some family questions.
Yeah, this is always difficult. I will tell you the thing I always tell donors when I'm talking to them about their collections. I always say the best place, when you have multiple children, the best place for your collection is in an archives, because then everyone has access to it at all times. This is where then digitizing might come in handy. And you can talk to your kids about who wants to be responsible for what part of this. You want to keep the original, and you want, that each one to have the digital files, but you need to have the right kid have the right piece. So if you have a child who is not really tech savvy or not really into it, having them handle only the digital files, which they will have to migrate as technology changes, they're not going to be the best person to handle it. If they're the person who just loves to throw things away and they go on cleaning sprees, like I will say, my dad loves to clean, loves to throw away. I would never leave anything with him that I was afraid would get thrown away. So you want to, if you have multiple kids, talk to them about which portion of this project they would like to be in charge of. And then I would suggest digitizing, and then the kids who don't have the originals can have the digital, and just make sure that they know that you want this continued to be passed down.
Do you have a family tree site that you could recommend?
So there's lots of different programs for family trees, but it's kind of be a little bit dependent on if you want to buy software or work with something that's already existing on a web-based platform. I have my family tree on ancestry.com because I like that you can hook all the documents right to it. I find it just very convenient. Now, the problem with that is that it is a paid subscription service, so not everyone wants to pay for it, which is totally understandable. I will say if you put up a family tree on there, you can access it. If you decide that you don't want to pay for the subscription anymore, the tree stays up. They don't take down the tree just because you're no longer paying, so other people will still be able to see it, other family members. But there are other free sites, so I would just look for other genealogy sites as well. Family Search is another site, another genealogy site similar to Ancestry, but that one's free. It's a little bit clunkier, maybe probably because it's a free service. It's a little bit clunkier to use, but they have that option. Jewish Gen, which is another free site, has family tree options. So I would check out the different genealogy sites to see maybe where you can put up a tree that gives you maybe some free options that allows you also to maybe hook some documents to it.
Okay. Robbie, here's an interesting one. Someone asked, how do you archive items and not pictures? For example, dog tags.
Yeah, so it's very similar. It depends on the object. So different objects take different care. So something like dog tags, I would just put in something like, I talked about those photo envelopes, so that you could put maybe 20, 30 photos in them. I also use those for small items like pins, badges, things like that. And then I just label what it is. It goes in the folder title gets labeled, whatever is in it. So you can put small items with your documents like that. And again, I would say things like pins, badges, dog tags, those little items can go together. You can also store things in flat boxes. So if you have plaques, different kind of larger objects like those can just go into flat, oversized boxes. Certain things I will wrap in acid-free tissue paper. That's going to be things like I have some different Judaica in our collection, some tallits, things like that. They are carefully folded, they are wrapped in acid-free tissue paper, and then they are stored in oversized box that fits the item size.
Okay. Someone asked, how do you preserve items that have been previously laminated years ago that are now beginning to turn yellow a little bit?
So unfortunately, there's really not much you can do if something's already been laminated. It's the damage is done. So you don't want to, we talk about don't do permanent damage. If you try to take it apart, you probably will just cause more damage. So unfortunately, you'll just really have to keep an item that's laminated. You might want to try scanning it. So if it deteriorates any further, you at least have that scan for the best quality that you could get. And that's true for any item that's deteriorating. There's nothing you can do. Scan it so at least you have that.
Okay, so there are lots of comments, but not questions. I'm scrolling to see that we make sure we answer everyone's question. Okay, if there are pictures already in a photo album, is that a good idea to archive that way instead of scanning the pictures?
So for photographs, or photo albums, I should say. So how I treat photo albums in archives, we normally take them apart. So we remove, we store in boxes. So we remove photos that are in albums into boxes labeled like we talked about, organizing and like we discussed. Now, there's exceptions to that. Sometimes the sticky backs, you just cannot get it out, or it's maybe a scrapbook where there's photos and documents, it's been glued in, taped in. We would cause more damage to take it out than we would to just leave it in. In that case, we leave it in. And what I do normally, it can be very difficult to scan something like that because when you're flipping something over that's fragile to get it on a flatbed, you could cause more damage. That's when we will normally photograph each page instead of scanning. So if you are worried that you are going to cause more damage by scanning something, take a photograph, a good quality photograph.
So that was actually the next question. What about taking photos of old photos rather than scanning? And you just answered it. Okay. I think pretty much we have answered every question. As I said, there are many comments about things, but the questions, you've hit them all. And let's see, best place to choose to donate to an archive.
That's a great question. So you want to find an archive that specializes in what your collection is. So I'm just going to use my example of my archive, the Leonard and Simons Jewish Community Archives. Our focus is on the Jewish community of Metro Detroit. So we will take anything having to do with the organizations and the people of Jewish Detroit. So we have a lot of personal papers and family collections in addition to our organizational records. So what I would suggest is take a look at the different archives in your city. You should do something, I always say do something either local or within your state. See if they have an archive that takes items that you have. So it could be because they specialize in a certain religion like we do, or it could be they just focus on a region or, you know, another thing. So there's university archives, there's special archives, special collections. There's a lot of different archives. So you just want to do a little research to see who in your area collects what.
Okay. There is another question about items. Somebody's father's tallit and tefillin bag from when he served in the IDF. How do you suggest preserving these items? And I think you answered it, but you might want to answer that again.
Yeah, I would suggest items that are material based, like clothing material based. Normally I store those in flat boxes wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. And depending on what the item is, sometimes you will roll it to avoid any wrinkles, but depending on what the item is. So you can roll it, you can fold it, wrap it in acid-free tissue paper, and put it in a flat box that fits it well. So you have to make sure that the the height, length, depth all fits for the item. You never want to squish anything. You don't want to force an item into a box that's actually too small for it. Reversely, you don't want to have a box that's too big for it, because the last thing you want is something fragile shifting around every time you move it because they have a huge box and this little item in the box. That's where, again, you want to make sure that you have measured and know exactly what size materials you need.
So there is one comment that's a great comment. Some universities have Judaica collections, and University of Florida has a tremendous collection, and they take family memorabilia. So that's something to know and share. Okay, what about a metal filing cabinet? Would you consider using that?
Metal filing cabinets are okay. The same thing in it. You use acid-free folders in it.
Okay, and how to preserve wedding videos? Oh, I
Okay,
need
so
that one.
videos are its own own fun struggle. So obviously we have a lot of obsolete media at this point. We have film, we have VHS, we have cassettes. All of this is obsolete media. So for this, you will most likely need to have a company, unless you possess the old technology, you will need to have a company transfer it. Have them transfer it to the current technology. That doesn't mean in the future you're not going to need to migrate it, but if you have a video, let's say a VHS tape, a videotape, you would probably have them migrate it to something like an MP4, which is the current standard in video preservation. I don't know what the standard is going to be in 10 years or 15 years, but that's the standard today. With audio, it's MP3s. And there's a whole, we could do a whole nother session on this, but I also want to just mention briefly the DVDs and CDs, because I mentioned that they're obsolete. If you have files on them, don't panic. It's okay. You can, if you have it, as long as you have a DVD drive, you can still get the files off. That you don't have to send out to anyone. You can take care of that yourself. So you just, like you do with any other external media, just move the files, put your DVD or CD in your drive, and just copy the files onto your computer or onto another medium, whether it's an external drive or flash drive. So you can, right now, as long as you have a CD or DVD drive, you can move it. I just don't recommend it, since you immediately have to move it as soon as you get it. That's why I don't recommend paying money for someone to migrate your stuff and then using obsolete media to start with. So that's why I said it. But you can, if you have, as long as you have a DVD or CD drive in your computer, you still can do it yourself. So
someone asked, home or professional to digitize?
It honestly is just going to depend on your personal skill. It's a lot of the equipment, like I will say in the archives, I send out VHS and film and cassettes. We don't have the old media. It would cost me too much money to try to do it in-house. It actually is cheaper for me to just send it out to a vendor. DVDs and CDs I do myself.
Okay. There are a number of questions about the worksheet, and we'll make that available, yes, with the video recording. If you send that to us again, Robbie, we can put that in with the recording when we put it on our website. And lots of thank you notes, lots of wonderful, great program. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I could read them all to you. We'll save the chat, maybe send you some of the great ones. Fabulous program. Thank you. Thank you. So wonderful. Wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to you, Corey.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you so much for monitoring that chat. Robbie, again, thank you so much. I feel like I can breathe a bit easier as I tackle the organization of my precious pictures and letters and newspaper articles and other documents. I hope that all of you feel comfortable now, more comfortable about organizing, storing, and preserving the vehicles that spark your precious memories. I know I do. And when Robbie says feel free to contact her, and I hope, Robbie, you're okay with this, she means it. I had seen Robbie in a presentation that Central Great Lakes region had put on, which is how I connected with her, and called her, and Robbie has given me so much time. I'm really appreciative. And so she is willing to give you some time too. Excuse me. Next week, hopefully, you will receive a short Google Forms survey, excuse me, to help us plan future sessions and let us know what you want and what you found valuable. Also on the survey, you will be able to indicate some water, Sam, please. Indicate if you would like to receive the informative and very helpful handout Robbie has put together, listing many of the resources she spoke about tonight. And we don't like to send out, I don't like to send out information unless you want it. So when you fill in the survey, please let us know that yes, you would like to do that, to have that. So what's next? This was the 4th program in the How to Live Forever series presented by the Archives and Education Department to encourage our members to create, save, and pass on their personal archives. Future sessions in this series includes information on identifying and creating, preserving, and conserving family heirlooms. And that will be on October 7th. And a lot of your questions were about those family heirlooms. There's some incredibly creative ways of using those family heirlooms when they're not conservative, being able to be conserved and creating other family heirlooms from that. And we're going to talk about that and also how to preserve and conserve them. Again, that's on October 7th. If you have creative ways that you've to share your own family archives, we're going on December 16th, we're going to be just giving everybody a chance to share how they've done it so that we'll learn from one another. And we hope you will mark your calendars and join us. It is an incredible journey to live forever through your stories and pictures and memorabilia. One that benefits you as the storyteller, collector, and organizer. It also is a priceless gift to your family and future generations. The gift of better knowing who they are because they understand where they come from. Thank you so much for joining us, and please make a concerted effort and a goal, a promise to yourself to start creating those family archives or continue if you've done that. Thank you so much for coming and have a good evening.
Corey, there is one question on how to get the prior programming. And I just want to say that it's on the Women's League website. And if you are a member in good standing, you go on the Women's League website, WLCJ.org, log in. And if you don't know your login material, you can click the button that says, don't know my password, we'll help you get in. And on the website are the previous 3 programs, and this one will be on probably at the end of next week. So thank you everyone for being with us. And there is a way to see those 3 previous programs.
Thank you, Debbie, and have a good evening, everyone. And thank you again for joining us. And Robbie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie.
Thanks, everyone.